Let's go to Chapter 1, Lesson 3, which is going to be about rod bend or rod load. And this has to do with the concept of no slack. I think it might be the most important of all the principles. If you've got no slack, your rod line is straight, and you move your rod, when you move your rod, your line's going to go somewhere. So we want to have no slack at the beginning of every casting stroke. If we have no slack at the beginning of every casting stroke, then we have a good chance of making a reasonably good cast. So this is a very important principle. So let's just talk a little bit about rod bend. If you look at this, this is rod bend in here. This is rod load, some people call it. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but when the weight of the line against the movement of the rod causes the rod to bend, it stores energy. And when it stores energy, when you stop, the rod straightens and propels the line. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that for every cast we have, we do a really good job of trying to prevent slack in the line. And you can see slack, unlike the first principle we talked about, which is constant smooth acceleration. You can't see smooth acceleration as easily, especially when you're involved in actually casting. But here you can see it. If your line doesn't get all the way to the end, and you don't see your line straighten out before you start your next casting stroke, you're going to have, in essence, you've got slack because you've got a bunch of line that's still not straightened out. So let's just talk a little bit about that. You're not going to be able to see this really good because of the glare on the grass and so on, but I've got a lot of slack in here on the grass right here. And I'm going to move my rod back and forth like this. And you can see I don't get much of a loop because all this slack, you can kind of see where the line's dying. Nothing happens. Because look at my rod bend. There is no rod bend. I can't store any energy. So if I put it out here straight though, and I make the same casting arc, now look at the rod bend. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure our fly or the end of our line is straight before we start our next cast. We don't want to have a lot of slack in our line. So one of the best drills we can do is do what I call the no slack drill, and we're going to work at doing a lot of the same things we did with the paintbrush except for the rod. It's just going to be smooth acceleration, smooth acceleration, smooth acceleration. You'll notice I hold my rod with my reel flat, so the face of the reel is parallel to the ground, and then all I do is accelerate smoothly and a little bit of rotation at the end. Accelerate and rotate, accelerate and rotate. I'm trying to get my line to completely straighten out. If it doesn't quite straighten out, move and get it straight. Make sure your fly is straight from the rod tip to your fly is a straight line, and then do it again. And the object is to try to get that line to straighten out every single time. Feel the rod bend when you first start the cast. That's important. Feel the rod bend when you first start the cast. When you feel that thing, your rod is going to bend right off the bat. It's going to bend and continue with just a nice smooth acceleration like in the paint drill to a good sudden stop. And if you get a lot of slack, let's say I had some slack in there, I would just move this way, take the slack out, and do it again. Do it again. And just get used to doing this until you can do that very smoothly. And that's what we're trying to do. This is just a simple little drill to practice the idea of no slack. And you should feel that rod bend. I like to think of pull. When you're right in this position, pull that tip. Pull the tip. Pull the tip. We just caught up on the grass. Pull the tip. Pull the tip. Pull the tip, pull the tip, just back and forth, and just get used to doing this. Now close your eyes and do it. Close your eyes, feel it. Feel the tip bend. Nice smooth acceleration from the very beginning to a good hard stop. That's an excellent drill, and I would suggest you do that on a regular basis when you're first learning. Let's talk about another practical application of understanding rod bend and rod load, and that's a cast that I use quite often on smaller streams or in places where I have a hard time getting to with a normal cast, especially if it's a smaller distance, a shorter distance. If I bring this, I grab my fly by the tail and I bring my rod back like this, that's just rod load. There's no cast involved at all. That's just rod bend or rod load, and I let go, boom, I've got a cast. So let me demonstrate. Again, all you're doing is making sure you have enough line or little enough line that you can actually get your rod back. You're going to bend your rod just like this, and you're going to be taut. And now you've stored quite a bit of energy in that rod tip. All you're going to do is let go. Boom, and you got a cast. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back in the bushes and demonstrate this to you. It's going to come right towards you, and you'll see how even in a big tunnel of bushes you can make a pretty good cast, understanding rod bend and rod load. You're going to make a bow and arrow cast. Okay. I'm in a big canopy right here. I've got bushes right over my head. There's no way to make a cast. I'm in a tunnel. There's a fish out in front of me, probably 18 to 20 feet away where that orange cone is. And by understanding the concept of rod bend and rod load, I'm going to be able to hook that fish. Even I've got a slight little headwind right into me. So I'm bringing this back to here, and then all I'm going to do, my rod is bent like you saw in the previous clip, and now we're just going to let it go. Boom, almost hit the cone. The problem you're going to have in here is figuring out how to get your fly back if you don't get a bite on the first time. But you're just going to have to bring your rod back behind you. Make sure you're grabbing that fly by the bend of the hook or the tail if it's got one. Bend right here. The farther back you go, the more bend you get. So if I go way back here, I get a lot of bend. So there we go. That's what we're going to do. That's called a bow and arrow, and it's taking advantage of an understanding of rod bend and rod load.